Chapter 21 Practicing Martial Arts by Hydesgrain. It was early in the morning and the first sunlight entered his new apartment when a black-haired youth holding a small owl chick woke up. He rubbed his dreamy eyes with his empty hand when noticed something was in his other hand. Remembering what happened the day before, Jason knew that it was his soul bond Artemis. Smiling happily, he looked at the sleeping owl. Jason wasn't sure when she slept in, but there was something particular in his room that changed overnight, and this change surprised him a lot. The mana stones that were still shining feeble yesterday were now indistinguishable from normal stones. There was not a single trace of mana left inside them, and Jason activated his eye, only to see that the radiating color of Artemis seemed to be stronger than the day before. From the outer appearance, Jason didn't notice any difference, but its white plumage was shining brightly. Comparing Artemis with a normal snowflake owl chick, Artemis' small size was the only noticeable thing that remained. Jason wasn't sure how exactly evolutions or mutations worked, but he trusted his eyes, which told him that Artemis was a treasure. The only thing he had to find out was how to grind the potential out of her. He already came up with a theory in his mind. Jason had even read some theories about evolutions from beast creators and the development of mutations, so there were more than enough things to try out. But to test most theories, Jason needed more credits, as they were either expensive or, as if that was not enough, they seemed to be extremely dangerous, so Jason had to prepare himself. Hunting beasts is considered as one of the top paid jobs, and becoming a hunter would solve Jason's problems. However, first, he had to prepare himself mentally and physically. Considering his fighting strength right now, fighting a 1-star wild beast after some martial arts practice shouldn't be that difficult. Maybe even hunting 2-star wild beasts might be possible. The most important thing he had to do now was to train his body, solving his malnutrition by eating more, raising up Artemis, and practicing martial arts. 2 out of the 4 matters were relatively easy and could be solved without any problems. Eating and training his body would be easy while he was still unsure about Artemis's mutation or what she would have to eat. About martial arts practice, Jason decided to memorize the Azure Feisty Ape technique and learn it, until he reached the technique's limit. He wasn't sure if he could ask Greg to spar with him, but after a second thought, he rejected this, though, as Greg was at the 2nd adept ranked with a non-elemental soul bond that would most likely increase his physique tremendously. Jason wouldn't be able to handle a single blow, and it would be impossible to figure out the flaws in his technique while being KO'd with a single hit. Disregarding this thought, Jason looked at the video clips of the Azure Feisty Ape technique while he waited for Artemis to wake up. But even hours later she wouldn't wake up, and Jason got worried, so he shook her slightly. Still being dreamy, Artemis woke up with a bad temper, and Jason was sorry for her. Artemis understood Jason's feelings because of the connection between them, but she was still tired. Jason was confused, as newborns would normally be more active, and he got more worried thinking about the possible illness she could have. Artemis transmitted one of her memories, which displayed her absorbing the remaining mana inside the mana stones and her falling asleep afterward. Seeing this memory, Jason was astonished. It wasn't common for wild ranked beasts to be so intelligent, and to be even able to transmit memories between each other was an astonishing feat. Sensing that everything was okay about Artemis, Jason calmed down slightly. He could also sense that Artemis was satiated, as if she ate a whole Titan pig alone, reassuring him in his worries about her food. Artemis was still sleepy, but before she fell asleep, a small white magic circle appeared below her, as she went inside Jason, appearing inside his soul world. Within the soul world, Artemis fell asleep peacefully. Jason stood up from his bed, walking around the apartment thinking about Artemis's weird behavior. It was weird, but everything was based on the mana stones, and Jason had a bad premonition. He hoped his assumption was false, otherwise, he had to face some financial problems. Please don't let her mutation be stimulated by mana, or even worse, a solely pure mana digestion. She wasn't even a 1-star wild beast at the moment and consumed 3 mana stones with the stored amount of mana 3 human experts could store inside them, or in other words 150.000 credits. And she hatched less than a day ago. Jason wasn't sure how long she would sleep to digest these 3 small mana stones, but there weren't many credits left in his bank account. At most Jason would be able to purchase 2 mana stones. He sincerely hoped that Artemis would be able to eat other things with smaller amounts of mana. Jason would even buy higher-graded beast meat to saturate Artemis, but right now Jason was too frightened by the worst-case scenario. Feeling depressed, Jason had to think of a way to earn more money, and the most efficient way for him would be hunting. As such, Jason decided to diligently train the Azure Feisty Ape technique, before he would continue doing anything else. He moved away some furniture to make some space for him to train. Looking at one video at a time and repeating the same moves done by the instructor over and over again. Repeating the few sequences the videos provided, Jason found out that he made some mistakes because it felt different than the first sequence, where he saw the instructor with his mana flow at school. Trying to find his flaws, Jason started to record his practice. After each sequence, he looked at the recordings only to find out that his movements were completely misplaced. Figuring out the flaws after rewatching everything multiple times, Jason tried to fix them slowly. In the evening when the sun went down, Jason laid on the ground full of sweat and not able to move, with a satisfied expression blossomed on his face. His stomach growled and he ordered something to get delivered over his phone after he noticed that he hadn't eaten anything over the whole day. He had completely memorized how the Azure Feisty Ape technique should look, and comparing his moves with his memories, it was easy to pick out the flaws. But Jason didn't know that his excellent eyesight played a huge role in finding the flaws, as some of them were only marginal and difficult to spot. Even the marginal flaws played a big role in the whole picture. In the end, Jason learned the technique better and more efficiently than others. The only small problem he had with the second sequence was to reconstruct the perfect mana flow, but his extraordinary senses, mana control and accuracy were actually very helpful here. 3 days passed without much change and Jason was within his apartment the whole time. Artemis was still sleeping inside the soul world, but the connections between both of them was still strong, lively, and it felt like it grew more attached to each other every passing day. Jason felt that Artemis was fine, so he didn't worry much about her. He focused on the Azure Feisty Ape martial technique, and after memorizing and practicing the first 3 sequences to a certain extent, Jason noticed that the instructor began to use different compatible weapons with the technique. Only a small modifier from the normal techniques has been done, but unpleasantly it was connected to a different playlist of videos which would cost credits. But Jason was delighted, as he was scared to face Wild Beastie with razor-sharp claws and teeth only with bare fists, and the fee credits he had to pay was nothing compared to the importance Jason gave his own life. Chapter 22 Unique Bloodline by Hydesgrain. Because he didn't have any weapons at home, which led Jason to look at what types of weapons were the most suitable to learn with the Azure Feisty Ape technique. In the end, he found out that gauntlets and daggers were the most suitable for this technique. Jason was tempted to purchase gauntlets, but he also wanted to get something sharp, as his body was still too feeble to kill or heavily injure beasts with his fists or gauntlets alone. Only humans with a strong physique would use gauntlets or other blunt weapons, and Jason was definitely not one of them. Looking at the online weapon store, he found a few thousand types of daggers at every grade. Jason was overwhelmed with the supply, but the price for most daggers wasn't something he could handle, so he had to filter his research slightly. With a little bit more than 130.000 credits left, he could afford a grade 1 dagger which ranged from 20.000 to a few 100,000 credits. After thinking for a few minutes, Jason understood that he had to buy a weapon sooner or later, as he would venture into the wild zones somewhere. Looking through the descriptions of a few dozen daggers within his price range, Jason found something that attracted his attention. Low Tier 1 Jade Iron Dagger. Jade Iron, tempered in the flames of a 2-star Azure Flame, able to pierce through mid-awakened ranked beasts. Price: 30.000 credits. For a Tier 1 weapon in this price range, to pierce through a mid-awakened beast was extremely good. There were many grades for weapons and armors, but the most commonly used ones were Tier 1 to Tier 3, while Tier 4 and 5 were already fairy tales. Jason didn't know a single human with a Tier 4 or Tier 5 weapon, as such he regarded them as legends. There were also mana and soul weapons which are special due to their certain effects. Mana weapons could enhance the weapon's strength or amplify an element, while soul weapons would grow within the soul world until the material used for the soul weapon would reach its potential limitation. Soul weapons could resonate with their contractor and enhance one's strength more than mana weapons if well nurtured. While normal graded weapons were already expensive, mana and soul weapons could only be purchased by rich merchants, nobles, higher royalty, and big families. Soul weapons were more expensive than mana weapons because the materials needed were super rare and the ability to grow and adjust its strength with the master was extremely powerful. Each tier could be divided into 4 segments indicating the capabilities within the grade, also called low, mid, high, peak. Low Tier 1 weapons are commonly only able to pierce the hide of weaker awakened beasts, while Peak Tier 1 weapons can already pierce the skin of evolved beasts without focusing on weak spots. He wasn't sure why the price for this dagger was so low, but the website only allowed genuine transactions and would punish frauds harshly. Jason purchased the low Tier 1 Jade Iron Dagger and was left with around 100.000 credits. This would give him the chance to purchase 2 small mana stones if needed. The parcel with the dagger arrived around afternoon and Jason began to learn the Azure Feisty Ape technique modified to use with daggers. 4 days later one could see a small but handsome youth running through the park sweating and slightly exhausted. Jason trained his body really hard the last few days and he ate a lot, which resulted in him growing some muscles and gaining a little bit of weight. He was still malnourished, but his physique got better with each day passing. Over the last week, his mana core was filled more and more with mana, and in a few days at most, Jason would reach the requirements to break into the 3rd novice rank. His mastery of the Azure Feisty Ape technique improved more and more while each sequence became smoother and smoother. Artemis was still sleeping inside the soul world, which made him slightly worried because it was already a week, but sensing her health, he knew that she was more than healthy. Inside his soul world, he inspected Artemis for a while when he noticed that the feeble color enveloping her was becoming denser. This was probably because of the mana she absorbed. The absorbed mana was probably able to initiate the mutation that was previously backslashes, but Jason wasn't sure about that. During the last week, Jason chatted a lot with Greg, which surprised him quite a bit. Greg messaged him the day after his soul awakening, and since then they became friends. Or at least chat buddies. Greg's parents had something against him because they thought Greg was persuaded to take a different first soul bond, which wasn't the case. 6 days after Greg formed his soul-bound contract with the reinforced horned bull, an advanced potential test found out that the non-elemental bull had a hidden bloodline that normal tests couldn't find. This hidden bloodline was from a rare race called Lesser Minotaur, race which also formed small societies and was almost like one of the foreign invading races except for its lack of intelligence. Greg persuaded his parents to let his soul bond get tested about his potential because he believed that Jason wouldn't lie to him, even if Greg wasn't completely sure why he did that. They have never talked much with each other, but Greg felt comfortable around Jason, which wasn't the case with his other ex-classmates, as they liked his strength and background. In the beginning, he wasn't sure why he believed Jason so much, but after seeing his golden eyes, Greg's suspicion was completely shattered. After finding out about the reinforced horned bull's hidden bloodline, Greg's family calmed down and they had a better view of Jason. But they were still suspicious, as it could have been luck. How should a previously blind youth be able to find out something that normal tests couldn't? They paid huge amounts of credits to let the reinforced horned bull calf tested its potential, and it was only because of that they found out about its bloodline. Normally nobody would make a test about something like that without prior knowledge, as it was a waste of credits and time. Nevertheless, they had to thank Jason, as this bull calf was a much better first soul bond than every other beast he could have chosen in the C-grade beast pagoda. Greg also informed Jason that he would move away in a few weeks into an A-grade city called Syro City, where he would attend one of the most prestigious high schools. His parents knew some head teachers from the school, and due to Greg's exceptional exam result with his 4-star soul awakening, it wouldn't be a problem for him to attend the school. After receiving this information, Jason was slightly shocked. He wasn't sure if Greg was his friend, but he was the only one at his age who he chatted with. The information that Greg would move away, into one of the 2 A-grade cities on Asterix, caused Jason to feel sad and even jealous. School would start its first semester in mid-August and there were still 6 weeks left, but Greg had to move in around 4 weeks. Jason wasn't even sure if he could apply for a school in a C-grade city. He felt that the gap between him and Greg would only widen as he would get high-ranked support from professional instructors and many resources to increase his rank, while Jason would be left behind. Even if Greg's parents were still suspicious about Jason, they had to thank him, so they asked Greg to question him if he needed something. Jason didn't expect that Greg's parents wanted to thank him, and he had to think for a while. He needed many things, so he wasn't entirely sure what to ask for, but considering the dangers of lacking soul energy, for example when Artemis would evolve, Jason got scared. "Greg, I've thought of something." Jason started before he hesitantly asked, "Can you ask your parents if they can get me permission to the Heaven's Hell technique? My credits and contributions are too low, and I don't know when I'll be able to attend a high school or if this high school has the permission to hand it over." The Heaven's Hell technique was a soul energy refining technique that would use up soul energy forcibly and replenished it continuously. To put it simply, soul energy could be compared to a muscle. If you don't use your muscle, there wouldn't be any change, but using the muscle and exhausting it consistently would force the muscle to be tempered and strengthened. And this is where the importance of high soul energy came into the game. Having more soul energy means you have more muscles to strengthen. This is harder but also results in higher benefits. Comparing Jason and Greg's soul energy, Jason would need to train a long time to increase his soul energy by 1 point, as was an increase of 100%, but for Greg with his soul energy slightly below 500, the increase of 1 point was equivalent to 0.2%. This was because the Heaven's Hell technique followed the exponential growth principles and Greg had a better foundation while Jason started way behind him. But even if this was the case, Jason had the chance to increase his soul energy with the Heaven's Hell technique. Jason also consulted Greg about the Azure Feisty Ape manual and some flaws he had, as Jason wasn't entirely sure if everything he did was correct. A few days passed and there was still no message from Greg, causing him to wonder if something happened. Maybe it was too rude for him to ask about the permission to use Heaven's Hell. But that shouldn't be the case, as it was a civilian technique which everyone could use with enough credits and some contribution, like hunting beasts or jobs like that. Jason wasn't sure, but he didn't think too much about it, as he practiced the Azure Feisty Ape technique with the dagger modification. Artemis was still in her deep slumber. His man's core reached almost its limit, and Jason was close to the breakthrough into the 3 novice stage, which made him happy. Jason's slim body became muscular, and his weight finally reached the common standards for a skinny youth. Suddenly Jason got a call while he was training with his dagger. Chapter 23: Unexpected Reward by Hydesgrain. Jason accepted the call almost immediately, as Greg's face suddenly appearing within the holographic screen. "Hey Jason, how are you doing?" Greg looked happy and Jason wondered what the cause was. "Hi Greg, I'm still practicing the Azure Feisty Ape technique with the dagger modification. Why are you so happy?" Jason was curious, so he asked straightforwardly. Hee, I have some news for you. Which one do you want to hear first? The good one or the super duper extreme nice one?" It was weird to see Greg so happy, as he seemed to have a rather cold personality previously. Maybe this is his real character, Jason thought. Well, maybe the good one first. Quote. Oh boring. Well okay, then we go in this order. The good news is that I was able to receive the permission for your Heaven's Hell technique. The super duper extreme nice news involves your bad grades. Hee. As you might know, I'm going to move to Syro City, and you might know that I don't have many friends. Furthermore, I know that you would love to go to high school in order to learn more about martial arts, beasts, wild zones, and many more things. Also, the resources provided by high school are much better, which is probably also a reason for your wish to attend high school, am I right? Throughout the last few days, I nagged my parents and told them that they owe you a favor because of their prejudice against you and my first soul bond with its lesser Minotaur bloodline, so they gave me the permission to use our newly obtained nobility rights if you fulfill certain requirements. Isn't that nice? Ha ha ha. Jason wasn't sure what to think about Greg's revelation. Receiving the Heaven's Hell technique was something good, but what Greg wanted to tell him about the nobility rights was unknown. He wasn't even sure what these rights were, and since when was Greg a noble? Exclamation mark. Question mark. Jason was way too confused and said dazedly, "Hugh. What about your nobility right? I don't know anything about the right of the nobles, and what requirements. Explain please." Exclamation mark. Greg smiled proudly. "We know that you're way too weak right now, but the reason I want to use my nobility rights is pretty simple. You'll get to attend the affiliated school of the Vanguard School will attend. Isn't that nice? I'm not a noble from birth, but we have more assets and credits than most small nobles on Asterix, and recently my mother was assigned as a minor noble because of her contributions to mankind, which makes me a noble of the second generation. Through this, our family is able to allow someone, in this case, you, as a student for the affiliated school with my mother's connections. You'll be able to enter the school with that. Unfortunately, that wouldn't save you from the rules of the Vanguard School, which is the main school I'll attend. While I'll enter the main school, you will enter one of the affiliated schools of it. Now to the small issue. Many rich merchants already tried to pay nobles, so that these nobles would use their nobility's right to take their children with them to the prestigious A-grade schools. The Vanguard School knows that and accepts them into the affiliated school during the first year. After a year without reaching the required strength, merit points, and other requirements, one will get thrown out immediately without caring about anyone's nobility right and whatsoever. Furthermore, I had to promise my parents a few things so that they accepted you, but that can't be considered a problem. The main problem is that you have to pass their small test. If you pass their test, you can go to Syro City with us and attend the Vanguard affiliated school, one of the most prestigious schools in Asterix, even with your bad practical exam results. Wait, as for your exam results, you have to let your blindness remark get removed. Otherwise even the nobility right can't help you apply for the school. My mother assumed that you have special trait eyes, and if you get a special certification about that, you might get some extra credentials for your application. Back to my parents' test. Because they know your mana cause rank and your former blindness, they were benevolent in my opinion, and you only have to defeat either one awakened beast or 5-5-star wild beasts in 3 weeks, without using mana pistols, rifles, and so on. Isn't that nice? Jason was still confused about what was going on, but getting to know that he might be able to attend a prestigious school in an A-grade city heightened his mood. Even if he was at the bottom of the chain in this school, Jason would have better chances to soar into the sky. Rather than staying within the C-grade city, without knowing for sure that he could attend a decent high school there. And his strength would be at the lowest chain everywhere, so he didn't really mind that at the moment. But to attend this school or even go to an A-grade city, Jason had to rely on Greg's family, which wasn't really what Jason wanted. Nevertheless, it was a great opportunity that would not come around every day, and Jason thought of a saying. Sometimes one had to take a step back before making a big jump. Listening to the stated requirements, Jason thought for a moment before he cursed Greg's parents in his mind. He was pitifully weak, had almost zero combat prowess, and his mana core rank was low, to say it nicely. Niece my foot! Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. If he put in enormous effort to defeat 5-star wild beasts, he should be able somehow to do it, but it would be extremely dangerous. Probably. At least, that was what Jason hoped for. Right now, Jason felt confident to fight some weaker wild beasts as his understanding of the dagger-modified Azure Feisty Ape technique deepened. In 3 weeks, Jason was confident to reach the 4th novice stage, and with some tricks, he might be able to fight against 5-star wild beasts, which any sane youth would only dare to do at the 8th or 9th novice stage with some company and good equipment. But fighting head-on with such a beast would be suicidal for Jason right now. Unfortunately, his chances would only increase slightly through the next few weeks, and he had to think of a plan to survive an attack against 5-star wild beasts. Jason and Greg chatted for an hour as both were in a good mood while Jason was deep in thought. After the call ended, Jason continued to practice his martial art technique. Watching some other videos about the Azure Feisty Ape technique, Jason found out that the mastery of martial art technique was divided into different parts, which also applies to weapon and elemental masteries. These dividers were called Basic Mastery, Familiar Mastery, Experienced Mastery, Profound Mastery, and Perfect Mastery. After the Perfect Mastery would be the combination of different techniques, but not many did this as it would waste too much time. Following the description of the videos, Jason saw, he figured out that he had entered the basic mastery of the Azure Feisty Ape technique. Nevertheless, Jason wasn't sure how good this was as he had nobody to compare with. The only thing he knew was that the Azure Feisty Ape was one of the weakest martial arts techniques of the Federation, which was also the reason it was free for everyone. He understood that the next 3 weeks were extremely important for him in order to increase his combat prowess and experience by hunting weaker wild beasts before he dared to fight against 5-star wild beasts. Jason had to face real beasts in order to get used to them. This was why Jason decided to head into the 1-star wild zone next to the city. Soon it was a plain, infested by many kinds of wild beasts, and it was mainly used for novice ranks to train there. These trainees were the most dangerous threat to them, as awakened beasts would be killed as soon as they were found inside the borders of a 1-star wild zone to keep the new generation safe. Jason's physique reached a normal degree and there were no signs of malnutrition seen, as muscles began to slowly cover his small body. He grew a few centimeters and was now 1.63 meters tall, which was the common height for a almost 14-year-old youth. Except for receiving the files about the Heaven's Hell Soul technique, nothing special happened and Jason finished his practice, went for a long jog in the park. Eating something, he washed up and went into the bed with a satisfied smile on his face. Chapter 24 First Blood by Hydesgrain. Waking up early in the morning, Jason opened his eyes slowly. Today he would leave the safety of the city for the first time in his life. He was expectant and scared at the same time. After washing up and eating a little bit, Jason called a shuttle which would drop him off at the oculist. He made an appointment after Greg told him about his remark. Today he would get his remark removed and maybe a special remark added. It was relatively easy to become his remark about blindness removed, as it was obvious that he could see once again, and the doctor would only have to send the information to the Federation AI, also called Aurora. Only half an hour passed, and everything was over. The remark in his exam result was instantly removed, which made Jason quite happy. The test he took right now was more complicated as it involved a few magic devices, and the doctor could only detect that Jason had mana eyes, but the test wasn't accurate as the graph ran riot with the stage of his mana eyes remaining a mystery. Furthermore, Jason kept the special effect of his eyes a secret, and a special remark was added to his exam results after some time. Special remark. Mana eyes. This made Jason quite happy and he left the office immediately after paying the 500 credit bill. It was more expensive than he had expected, but Jason had to do it, so it didn't really matter. Calling another shuttle, Jason was brought to the outskirts of the city where the protection sphere was situated. Each city was constructed inside a protection sphere operated by mana, which looked like a transparent dome. One could only go through this dome because it wasn't in a solid state. The dome was like an all-embracing wall that would let everything through. However, it would detect and eliminate foes as it could comprehend if the invading being was a human with criminal records or not, a soul bond, or one of the few beasts used for errands that had either special emblems or specific mana fluctuations radiating from them, saying that this beast was a soul bond to detect. It was maintained by an AI, which made everything possible. Otherwise, it would be quite hard to detect which humans were harmless and which ones were known for associating with terrorist organizations. but the dome used up a high amount of mana, which was its downside. Scanning a few hundred kilometers around the city's outskirts to prevent even the slightest accident was very energy-consuming. This was also partly the reason why higher-graded cities were more expensive to live in than Artes City, Jason lived in. They had stronger defenses, causing the prices for almost everything inside these cities to increase due to higher fees, taxes, and so on. That, however, wasn't the biggest issue cities had to face, as beast tides occurred every now and then. Every few years thousands of beasts gathered together in order to charge through the lands. These beast tides were considered the most dangerous threat humanity had to face after the Dark Ages began. Only now humanity really began to have a certain degree of control over the beast tides, as hunters hunted down the high reproductive beasts nearby once they break through a certain threshold. This helped in order to prevent some beast tides from reaching their city. However, to protect the city, the security including the hunter bureaus had to be well developed and armed. Jason entered the plains territory, while he shuttle drove closer to the transparent dome that came into his view. Due to his mana eyes, Jason could see the dome's mana fluctuations. While normal humans could only see small reflections when they looked at the dome. The plains were vast, and it was the first time for Jason to see so far because there was not a single construction obstructing his sight. Around a kilometer away from the dome, the shuttle stopped, and Jason had to leave it after paying the fee. Walking closer to the dome, Jason noticed many youths were having a picnic, while their soul bonds strolled around, playing together. The closer he came to the dome, the more youths Jason could see, and he noticed that more and more youths wore armors, with weapons like bows, pistols, and so on around them. In this era, humanity modified all kinds of weapons to operate them with mana, as it was the strongest energy one could use. Furthermore, mana was a high-quality resource that seemed to be unlimited. Some pistols operated by mana could instantly crush the skull of a strong beast, but these weapons used up a lot of mana and were manufactured with rare materials. Even if Jason was allowed to use guns to defeat 5-star wild beasts, he wouldn't even able to buy the weakest pistol operated by mana, as he had only around 100,000 credits left. Ammunition was also expensive, and killing wild beasts with them would end up in a huge loss. The youths Jason saw was probably training their skills and would only use the gun in life-threatening situations. He could also see some bigger groups of youths surrounding some middle-aged men and women. Looking at their uniforms, Jason concluded that even in the summer holidays some classes would make a trip to the wild zones to hone their martial art technique. Jason remembered that a year ago his class did the same thing over a whole week, but he was just learning at home because of his blindness. The middle-aged men as women were the teachers, and they were strong enough to save the students in dangerous situations. Jason was now in front of the dome, and touching it Jason felt the huge amount of mana flowing through him. Stepping through the dome, Jason shuddered for a short moment before he was attacked by fresh air, mana, and nature itself. Comparing the amount of mana inside the dome with the outside, one could easily understand why the plains looked so different. Inside the dome, the plains looked relatively lifeless with small specks of flourished land, lively trees and bushes, but the outside was completely different. For Jason, it looked like everything was alive. This was somewhat annoying, but even after walking around a whole hour, Jason couldn't find smaller groups. Thus he decided to give it a try against the smallest one he could find. A group of 3 harmless herbivore 1-star wild beasts called horned zebras was his target. They did not attack humans without any reason and eat grass, so most hunters let them alive. Horned zebras were the weakest beasts on the plains, even before the ember rabbits, and were preyed by most carnivores. Nobody hunted them for credits because it was almost negligible for their credits, and they were not used for training either, as they were just too weak. But Jason had never killed any living being, so he wanted to hunt a peaceful beast even if his mind said he shouldn't. He knew that the only advantage these horned zebras had was their speed, as it was comparable to 2-star wild beasts. More than 100 meters apart from the beasts, Jason saw them grazing without noticing his silent approach. The plains were almost empty as there were not many hiding spots, so Jason had to be as silent as possible. A single noise and the horned zebras would notice him, while Jason hoped that they wouldn't turn around. Approximately 30 meters apart from them, Jason's adrenaline began to soar, and he couldn't hear anything because of his throbbing heart. Each step took an eternity, and the moment he crossed the 10-meter range between him and the horned zebras, they sensed something amiss. Turning around, one of them saw a young human with something sharp in his hand. Noticing the danger encroaching it, one horned zebra cried out as it ran away, causing the other horned zebras to startle, looking for danger in addition to the direction they had to run away. Jason knew that the 10-meter range was the furthest he could go without being noticed, as it was written in many books he read and common knowledge. Most beasts have good senses and could feel danger lurking around them. While the horned zebra cried out, Jason had pushed himself as strong as possible from the ground, with mana enveloping his lower body as support. He reached a striking speed before he appeared in front of one of the horned zebras without it being able to react accordingly. Jason could only see both horned zebras being startled before Jason pierced out with his jade iron dagger, which was enveloped with a paper-thin mana membrane. Piercing through one of the horned zebra's chests like butter, its eyes turned dim before it could even cry out in pain. Blood splattered on Jason's face, as he shuddered for a second in fright, before he pulled out the dagger, causing another fountain of blood to spout out on him. His golden pupils brightened up as he gripped the other horned zebra's mane with his free hand before it could escape from the shocking death of his comrade. Getting stabbed with the bloodied dagger, Jason killed the horned zebra with a clean strike. After the second horned zebra died, Jason pulled out the dagger once again, and only now did Jason realize that he had killed living beings. Mana was everywhere, and there was not a single inch without it. Looking at the trees and bushes all around, Jason felt pure nature invading his pores. Jason felt happy seeing that, and he wandered around the borders while holding his dagger firmly. He wasn't completely on guard, but his brain didn't forget that wild beasts could attack him any time. Nevertheless, the scenario surprised Jason, and he was too astonished to focus on hunting for the moment. After half an hour, Jason was able to focus on his mission once again. He noticed that he could see beasts from far away, and he thought it was because of his special eyes, as Jason was told during this morning's test. His eyesight was extraordinary, and so were his reflexes and other functions that included his eyes. Looking out for solo 1-star wild beasts, Jason noticed that most beasts moved in small groups of 3 to 5 beasts. Chapter 25: Accepting Reality by Hydesgrain. He was shocked about his own calmness and bloodthirstiness, as it felt amazing to have the power about life and death. But only a second later, Jason was frightened as he shuddered violently before vomiting his breakfast and other stomach fluids. His legs gave in, and he looked shocked at the horned zebra corpses while his hands trembled. The hand around the dagger loosened up, and it took him quite some time until he regained his senses. Jason heard some noises a little bit away from him, which helped him distract himself before he saw that a 2-star wild beast fanged coyote fought another 2-star wild beast scaled wolf for a horned zebra corpse some distance away. He noticed that this was probably the corpse of the third horned zebra, and Jason slowly began to understand that outside the dome the strong ruled while the weak can only hide in misery. Being at the bottom of the food chain, the horned zebras were considered prey of all carnivore beasts, while 5-star wild beasts were the strongest in this wild zone with the exception of humans. Before, Jason was also seen as a nuisance and useless because he was blind, even if his theoretical results were more than excellent. Everybody knew that knowledge was important, but what is the use of it when you can't survive against the weakest beast during beast tides or other accidents? Relying on others. Don't kid yourself. There are only a few humans who care about strangers, and even fewer with enough strength to help them. Jason started thinking, and a sudden thought appeared in his head. The rules of the jungle don't solely apply outside the dome. Jason noticed that the whole society, including the government and federation system, was built according to one's strength. The stronger one was, the higher was his or her position. Excluding the fact that some strong humans didn't have any leading or managing abilities which made them useless as executives, humanity was still relatively well off, compared to 300 years ago. Sometimes powerhouses understood their shortcomings, turning them to step back for more knowledgeable authorities, but that wasn't always the case, and it was still unknown how safe laws were if one was weak. It was the same with his mother's death. He received some credits, but Jason doubted that the mysterious heir was punished for killing innocent humans. Jason understood one thing for sure. If he wanted to live his life without getting forced to do something he didn't want to, Jason had to get stronger, fast. Without relying on somebody else that could throw him away any moment, Jason's mindset changed slowly. Greg was a friend to Jason, but he had to understand that he couldn't believe everyone naively. If Greg was a bad person, he could use Jason as a marionette, or even worse, without receiving any punishment, if Greg's family was powerful enough. Suppressing his disgust, he stored the horned zebra corpse before looking at the fighting two-star wild beasts. Both were injured and it looked like they were evenly matched. Jason went closer as the scaled wolf ducked under the coyote's claw in order to bite into its abdomen while using its claws to rip the flesh apart. He saw this and began to rush towards the two, which were a few dozen meters apart. His speed was slower than before because he didn't use any mana to reinforce his lower body, as he had used up a lot of it previously. There was only a little mana in his core left to make a quick stride. The coyote, which was now heavily injured, gripped the wolf with its front legs to bite in its shoulder while it used its hind legs to slash at the wolf's lower body. Both were now heavily injured as the coyote that laid on the ground noticed a human behind the wolf. It shrieked out in fear, but unfortunately was already too late, and the wolf's neck was already pierced by the bloodied dagger. But the dagger didn't stop there, as the wolf's neck was only an obstacle required to reach the coyote. Jason could see the beast's fear, which caused him to almost hesitate before the dagger penetrated the coyote's chest. Both beasts died without much pain, and Jason vomited some gastric fluids before he gathered himself. He felt still disgusted to kill a living being, but the second time was much easier than the first time. It took him only a few seconds to regain his senses before he picked up the two-star beast carcasses and the third horned zebra corpse, which laid only a few meters away from the small battlefield, as he looked out for a tree which he climbed up. Not many beasts were able to climb up trees in this 1-star wild zone, except a few 4- and 5-star wild beasts in the core areas. Jason was at the outskirts of the wild zone and extremely close to the dome, but the dense mana he felt was perfectly fit for him to replenish his mana. It took him no time until his mana was replenished. He had enough time to think about many things, like his attitude towards beasts, how he fought, and which flaws he made during the short fight. The biggest problem was his mental state, but this would only last for a few more fights until he made up his mind. Following this, Jason went down the 3 and searched for more 1-star beasts. He wanted to use the 1-star wild beasts to clear his mind before he would try fighting 2-star wild beasts. His dagger was sharp enough to penetrate all kinds of wild beasts, and Jason focused his mana consumption on his lower body to look after his speed. Following this, a few hours passed until the sun went down and Jason went into the dome again with clothes full of blood. Jason attacked another 3 small 1-star wild beast groups, but he killed only 4 beasts because one time he made a noise missing his timing, while another try caused him to almost die as he was almost crushed by the 1-star bison he attacked. But Jason found out something important. His eyes. The closer a beast was to him, the easier it was for Jason to predict where he would be attacked. It was still a theory, but Jason found his eyes more and more interesting, which made him curious. What special eyes did my mother have, and are my eyes a mutation from her eyes, or is there something else I don't know about them? I doubt these eyes are normal mana eyes. But there wouldn't be anyone to answer his questions, so Jason had to disregard this thought. He had to find out everything by himself, but that was okay for him. Calling a shuttle to take him home, Jason had to wait a few minutes. Gazing inside the storage space, he saw 7 1-star wild beast carcasses and 2 2-star carcasses. It was more than Jason expected for the first day, and going through his fights while waiting for the shuttle to come, he remembered many flaws. But for Jason, the whole day proceeded smoother than he previously thought, as he was still uninjured and healthy. He expected to sustain some injuries, but everything was fine. The shuttle arrived and Jason was in front of his apartment 40 minutes later. After ordering delivery, Jason went inside the apartment to rectify his flaws. Battling with wild beasts was different than training at home, and after today Jason understood that he had to hone his technique with real combat experience. Otherwise, he would always stay behind others. Chapter 26: Artemis Awakening. By Heidesgrain. Waking up early in the morning like every day, Jason washed up and changed into a new set of clothes. It was a set routine for him, but somehow today felt different. Jason's eye itched and his muscles ached while his whole body shivered. It was uncomfortable and slightly painful, but Jason was still smiling as he felt something happening inside his soul world. Artemis was waking up, and Jason thought his body aching was the result of her sharing some of her strength, even if it wasn't much. Jason's mana core grew almost 1/3 in size while his body went through a small change. After a soul bond was formed, it took a certain amount of time to strengthen the connection. This time was important as it allowed the Master and the soul bond beast to get to know each other, and after the connection was strengthened enough, the beast would share some of its strength with the Master. The shared amount was determined by one's soul, and this couldn't be changed even if the soul bond beast wanted to give its contractor more strength or mana. While his body was in pain, two things astonished Jason a lot. Artemis woke up after almost 2 weeks and she was already completely grown up. With a wingspan of 80 centimeters and a length of 30 centimeters, the snow-white Artemis looked almost like a normal snowflake owl, except for her smaller stature and the fact that she previously digested pure mana. But the most surprising fact was that his mana core grew so much in size. According to normal standards, his mana core should only grow a little bit, at most 5% to 10%, because 1-star wild beasts don't possess much mana, but Jason's mana core grew almost 1/3, which was probably a shared amount of around 1/3. Jason was still only at the 2nd novice rank, close to the 3rd rank, and his mana core was previously only at the same rank, but now it was larger than that and comparable to 3rd novice rank mana cores. Not only his mana core grew so much, but even Jason's physique increased quite a lot. When his body stopped itching and the pain subsided, he could feel that his physique also increased slightly less than 1/3. The highest increase was, however, his body structure, and Jason felt much lighter and more flexible. Thinking about the increase, he was once again reminded that Artemis was an agile beast type, which was the cause for his priority enhancement on speed, flexibility, and so on. Apparently, his soul would share around 1/3 of a beast's strength, mana, soul energy to the contractor, which was more than 3 times the best average of 10%, which was seen as exceptional. Seeing the shared amount was so big, Jason was happy that his soul was special even if his soul energy was weak. Considering the fact that he could grow slowly with Artemis, once she evolved his power would soar. Thinking about his soul, he was reminded about the soul awakening, and it still felt that there was some space left, and the previous feeling about his soul being incomplete confused him. After waking up, Artemis left the soul world, and she appeared in front of Jason inside a white magic circle. She could already fly and flapped her wings to reach Jason's shoulder, where she sat down. After that, she rubbed her head at Jason's cheek, showering him with her love. While patting her, Jason ate breakfast. Artemis wasn't hungry and Jason felt that she was still full, but to prepare himself for the worst case scenario, Jason ordered another small mana stone for 50,000 credits. From his whole fortune, only 50,000 credits were left. It was 8 a.m. when Jason went outside with Artemis on his shoulder. He called a shuttle, like always, and went on his way to the 1-star wild zone. Before that, Jason sold the carcasses of the 7 beasts he killed, gaining him a huge fortune of 14 credits. Keeping the carcasses would probably be better than selling them, but Jason had no use for them at the moment and their body would only rot in his spatial storage. Without an integrated cooling system, meat and other food would only get bad inside the storage, so it was better to sell it than wasting the beast's death. Jason was really uncomfortable around crowds of people, and he rushed out of the shop. He sold the carcasses as soon as possible while avoiding eye contact with everyone. Artemis was looking at the beast corpses when Jason took them out, but there was only marginal interest in them and nothing much for her as she was saturated. Continuing his journey, Jason stepped through the dome once again 40 minutes later. Jason pondered if he should set up a tent for the next few days, as he had to waste a lot of time driving back and forth. Adding the price for the shuttle each time, Jason decided to buy a tent and other necessities in the evening. Today he was much more comfortable to fight than the day before, and his confidence reached a new high as his combat prowess increased due to fixing some of his flaws. He wanted to try fighting a 2-star wild beast, and looking around for 2 hours Jason found a solo 2-star fanged coyote. Sneaking up to the fanged coyote, Jason was much calmer than the day before, but he was still noticed around 20 meters away from his prey, and Jason changed his position into a sprint without hesitation. But he still didn't use his mana, as he had learned that the amount of mana he possessed was too small and could only hold out for a short moment. Wasting mana. Not with me. Even if his mana core increased in size, the stored amount was still marginal compared to his average pals. Seeing Jason running up to it, the fanged coyote's eye turned bloodthirsty. Charging at Jason with it full speed, it was faster than the human. Pouncing at him, Jason was slightly astonished to see that his eyesight was better than the day before. But there was no time to think about that right now, as the coyote's claws were only a short distance apart from Jason's chest. Seeing the attack clearly, Jason used a little bit of his mana to reinforce his feet and ankles and stopped within a minuscule amount of time, causing the claw to miss its target. It wasn't healthy to stop abruptly out of a full sprint for the ankles and feet, but the mana enhancement protected him from suffering serious injuries as he pierced out with his dagger, aiming at the shoulder. The dagger pierced easily into the coyote's shoulder, only to stop slightly at the obstacle, also called bones. But with his grade 1 dagger, bones of a 2-star wild beast were comparable to thin sticks, and the bones shattered without much resistance, killing the coyote. Jason's hand was deep inside the dead coyote's shoulder, and even if he had made up his mind about killing beasts, that was too much. This situation was still disgusting, and he had to use some force to pull out his hand with the dagger gripped firmly. Until now Artemis was still on Jason's shoulder, but after killing the coyote it jumped off and used its talons to open up its chest. Pulling out a pebble-sized black core that radiated some mana, Artemis picked it up and gulped it down. Magical beasts have mana cores, while every beast below them has uncompleted cores. Wild beasts don't even have a core, and when they absorbed mana a black pebble would slowly form. The black color came from the impurities inside the incomplete mana core, and they had to be removed before a beast could enter the next rank or another beast could eat the incomplete core of its prey. Once a wild beast reached the awakened rank or evolved, the core would slowly begin to form, and it was called awakened core. The evolved beast finished forming the core, while unblemished beasts refined their core, and finally when a beast reached the magical beast rank a complete mana core was formed. Humans were lucky as their mana core was formed since birth and they didn't have to struggle like beasts. Chapter 27 Glutton by Hydesgrain. Artemis gulped down the black pebble and looked at Jason with greedy eyes. It looked like she could eat these incomplete cores full of impurities without worries as she looked at Jason full of desire. He knew Artemis wasn't hungry. However, she wanted to get some mana as she felt that eating more of this black pebble core would benefit her. After understanding that these impure cores weren't harmful to her, he was relieved. So, Jason decided that Artemis would get every incomplete core from the beasts he hunted, as wild beast cores weren't worth anything. He was quite happy to find out that she would eat these pebble cores because this was most likely the solution to his financial problem. Jason wouldn't have to feed Artemis mana cores all the time as he could hunt beasts for her. Digesting pure mana would strengthen her whole body, and maybe it could increase the limits of her race over time or force an evolution. Normally beasts can only digest a certain amount of foreign mana and strengthen themselves until they reached a certain limit, but apparently Artemis loved eating these pebbles and Jason continued his hunt happily. There was a theory about the relation of a beast's potential to the amount of mana one could absorb and how it was related to the evolution of the beast. The theory said that higher potential equals to an acceptance of more mana in one's body, while more mana equals to a higher percentage to evolve. But this theory was still not completely processed. In the evening one could see the happiest youth one had ever seen as he jumped around with a bright smile with a snow-white owl circling around him. Jason's combat prowess increased over time, and he hunted another 3 solo 2-star wild beast and another group of 2 2-star beasts which he killed easily with his increased amount of mana. Fighting against 2 beasts was relatively difficult, but Jason attacked the tendons of one beast causing it to slow down while he defeated the other beast with the help of the glutton Artemis. Artemis continued eating the pebbles and Jason felt his body itching all the time while Artemis grew in strength. When the shuttle arrived, Jason calmed down and Artemis vanished inside the magic circle she summoned. The magic circle was connected to his soul world and only he himself and his soul bounds could use it. After eating 5 2-star wild beast pebbles, Artemis was completely filled with mana and she had to digest it, so she went into the soul world in order to sleep. Jason thought it would probably be the same as the time when Artemis absorbed all the small mana stones, but this time, she would have to digest less than before. Remembering that he had bought another small mana stone, he noticed that he had to keep it away from Artemis as she didn't need it right now. Another thing Jason noticed was that Artemis was a greedy glutton as she didn't know when to stop. He thought and felt after the 3rd pebble core that she was full, but she continued eating these cores as if they were snacks. Jason had to restrain her, otherwise it could be problematic. Arriving at his apartment, Jason tried to fix the flaws he still had. Afterward, he used the quantum bracelet to purchase a tent, non-perishable food and other necessities to camp close to the dome. Furthermore, he bought a large mana-operated freezer which could hold a bunch of carcasses. He could even inject incomplete mana cores to operate the freezer, which was convenient. The material of the freezer was cheap, but the size of the freezer with over 300 cubic meters caused its price to reach 30.000 credits. Jason's funds were slowly dried up, but there wasn't much he had to buy after that, and he thought the freezer was a good investment. Requesting the city AI if he could camp close to the 1-star plain wild zone, it was accepted within 3 minutes. All parcels arrived after Jason finished showering and he put the content into his spatial storage. Then he sat down with the mana stone in his hand. He wanted to break through and now was the time for it. Normally he wouldn't need the mana stone for his breakthrough, but the sudden increase in his mana core size due to Artemis' shared strength forced him to stabilize everything first. Using the mana in his surrounding and inside the mana stone, Jason enveloped himself with a thin mana layer before slowly absorbing everything. His mana core was filled to the limit, and using the mana he pulled out of the mana stone to invade it, the mana core began to grow slowly while black dots inside the core began to get pushed out. Jason's pores opened slowly and he couldn't notice anything in his surroundings because he was immersed in gathering and absorbing the mana around him. Hours passed and after a deep breath, Jason's pores opened as a black mist was exhaled while his physique grew stronger, bright shining light enveloped him and his mana core stopped enlarging. Novice rank 3. Finally. The last few weeks were exhausting for Jason, but it was exciting compared to the straight and boring 9+ years of him gathering mana inside the eyeballs. Previously Jason was extremely weak, and he didn't have any type of strength, and everything was boring for him, but now it was different. Getting stronger felt amazing and Jason felt almost addicted to the sensation of growing stronger. Sensing the increased strength inside him, Jason smiled. After that he decided to open the Heaven's Hell technique to read through it. Greg had sent him a copy before, but only now had Jason enough time to read through it. There were many pages, and the content was complex and written in technical language even for the first level, so Jason had quite some problems reading it at first. He had to reread every page a few times until he understood it slightly. It would probably take a day or two until he remembered every detail, but it was necessary for Jason before he would start training his soul, as it was one of the most dangerous training methods one could practice. Even small issues could end with injuring his soul world, while major issues could in the destruction of one's soul world. But this won't happen if Jason follows the descriptions written inside the manual. It was already late at night and Jason went into bed as he slept in after a short moment. Chapter 28 Mana by Hydesgrain. Getting woken up through suffocation wasn't something pleasant, and Jason was forced to gather his thoughts, as he couldn't breathe due to something soft covering his face. It was Artemis trying to cuddle with Jason, and unknowingly she caused him to suffocate a little bit. Jason was fully awake now, and he got out of his bed to notice that Artemis looked livelier, and her plumage shimmered faintly. Only Jason noticed that her whole body was covered with lines of mana flowing through her whole body like blood. This astonished Jason, and he wondered if Artemis' blood fused with the digested mana since yesterday, because the mana was moving around full of vigor and life. If that was the case, Artemis's strength would increase by a lot, because every move she made would be naturally enhanced by mana. Even if that was the case, Jason guesses that the amount of mana fused inside her blood would be almost negligible, as it would boost the strength of Artemis by less than 0.001% at the moment, and it was more than negligible. The lines of mana Jason saw were almost invisible and thinner than most threads, but still there. Artemis jumped on Jason's shoulder after he changed his clothes, and both went outside. Jason was ready to sleep outside, and to be honest, he was expectant to sleep on the plains under the sky, even if it was inside the dome. 40 minutes later, Jason stepped through the dome again as his hunt began. Aside from eating a small lunch, he hunted the whole day until around 6 p.m. when the sun came down. Jason was pleasantly surprised about his teamwork with Artemis, as it was much easier for him to take out 2-star wild beasts in groups of 2 to 3 with her. Artemis was a 1-star wild beast, but she seemed to be extremely smart, causing him to wonder if she would be able to defeat beasts on a higher rank than her own once she gained some combat experience, because most wild beasts were extremely dumb and driven by their instincts. While Artemis was a very good companion, Jason's combat experience brought him huge results, as he was tempted to fight a lone 3-star wild beast. However, he disregarded this thought for now, as he could still sense some minor flaws in his technique which he couldn't really detect. A single fault could cost him his life. They hunted 4 groups over the day. All in all, 10 2-star wild beasts were killed by him. Most of his time was used up for searching small beast groups with weak combat prowess. Artemis was saturated after eating 2 2-star wild beast cores, but she wanted to eat more, which Jason interrupted instantly. He had to maintain the mana-operated freezer, and he wanted Artemis to not eat too much so she wouldn't leave him for a good nap. Jason was still unsure how to calculate how much Artemis could digest in a few hours that they could hunt together, while Artemis could grow along with Jason. Still, Jason knew that she could digest around 5 2-star wild beast cores in one night, so eating 5 over the whole day should be fine for now. He could increase it later on, but for now, giving her 5 2-star wild beast cores was the best solution for Artemis to grow stronger during the night. She had to accompany Jason during the day while earning combat experience, which led him to his previous solution. He felt lonely since his mother died. Even Greg, who he hadn't called previously, was growing attached to him. Now with Artemis' birth, he suffered a little bit, even though he knew she was with him during her slumber, but she wasn't really there in a materialistic way. His hunting skills increased each day, and Jason hoped that he would be able to kill 5-star wild beasts in less than 3 weeks. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to enter an A-grade city, let alone a school there. Jason used the remaining wild beast cores to maintain the mana-operated freezer, and it looked like the freezer could be operated for a day with his remaining 5 2-star wild beast cores. The best thing about the freezer was that even if Jason stored it inside his spatial storage, it would still work perfectly. One could say that the large freezer was comparable to a small integrated cooler, and it was definitely cheaper. Jason practices his martial art under the clear night sky, and it felt much better than train in a small apartment. After that, he took out a basin and poured water inside to wash up. When Jason finished cleaning himself, he opened the Heaven's Hell manual and read it for a few hours before he went back inside the tent to sleep. He fell asleep soundly while Artemis digested her incomplete wild beast cores. During the next day, nothing special happened except his tries to hunt slightly bigger groups of at least 3 2-star wild beasts when he came back to his tent. He saw a few hundred luxurious mansion-sized tents erected, and compared to his 2-person tent they looked gigantic. Probably around 20 people could stand in such tents with enough space left to walk around. Jason wondered what's going on, but he hoped that they would train inside the Penn Star Plain Wild Zone, as he had trouble avoiding so many beasts all the time. The 1-star zone Jason entered every day was overpopulated by almost every kind of beast, but the main problem was that the beasts gathered up in bigger groups instead of striving around alone. Jason had to avoid many beast groups, and he was often way too close to get detected and attacked by them, which was slightly scary. If these mansion-sized tents had trainees inside, they would most probably hunt huge numbers of wild beasts, decreasing his efforts to walk around inside the wild zone tremendously. Today he hunted 15 2-star wild beasts, and he gave Artemis 5 of them, while another 5 were used for the freezer before eating something and improving his martial arts. After an hour Jason stopped his practice, and he took out the Heaven's Hell manual to read it through. Another 2 hours passed, and it was already dark while only a few lights and the stars lightened up the surrounding. Jason remembered now every crucial detail of the manual's first level, and he readied himself to use the technique today. Chapter 29 Heaven's Hell by Hydesgrain. The first level of the Heaven's Hell technique was simple compared to the following levels, and it only used up a marginal amount of soul energy, even Jason could barely afford. While the first level indicated that one had around 0.1-9 soul energy units in numbers, the second level would need at least 10 to 49 soul energy to work properly, with a few additional requirements. Jason's soul energy was close to non-existent, and it was already fortunately that he could form a contract with a 1-star wild beast cub. Now, with his increased soul energy due to Artemis's growth, his breakthrough, and the big overall share he received through his unique soul, Jason's soul energy reached finally 1 unit, which was enough to control Artemis properly as his soul bond. Having the lowest required soul energy, Jason could only perform the Heaven's Hell technique once before his soul had to replenish the soul energy over time. As such, he had to be careful. Even if the first level was simple, it could be extremely dangerous. He entered the soul world carefully, where Jason met the sleeping Artemis. Walking around his own soul world was interesting, and he hadn't done it before because there were too many things he had to do. It was the first time for Jason, and he looked around with shining eyes. All kinds of color could be seen floating around his soul world, while a dense golden hue accompanied everything inside his soul. Looking down, he could also see the golden hue enveloping him, causing Jason to feel refreshed and calm. There was not the slightest anxiety seen in his eyes. Looking around, Jason got the feeling of a home. In this place, he was welcomed, which made him happy as he continued to walk through his soul world until he entered the center of it. There was a golden unstable liquid in the form of a ball that was floating slightly above Jason's head. Everyone who underwent the soul awakening had the same thing inside their soul, which was a mysterious liquid in various sizes. Meanwhile, the soul and the size of the liquid, surrounding the weird-looking ball, differentiated for each individual. The existence of the liquid ball was the same for everyone, and it was the soul energy surrounding the so-called soul world core. Many also called it one's soul, but the commonly used name was soul world core. Around the soul world core was the soul energy attached in form of unstable liquid. The amount of soul energy within indicated the size of the core because it was normally stored within. While most cores had at least the size of a ping-pong ball, Jason was glad that he found his grain-sized soul world core within a rather short amount of time. His core didn't have a particular form right now, and there was only the mysterious liquid floating aimlessly around with the soul world core as the center. The soul world core was the starting point of each soul world and its life. Looking at the grain-sized soul world core, Jason was slightly embarrassed about his unique and fabulous soul world but useless soul energy. The golden hue around him began to shine faintly as he calmed down almost immediately, which Jason didn't really notice. Remembering his main purpose to enter the soul world, Jason concentrated on the grain-sized soul world core. Opening the soul world core slightly, Jason wanted to move the soul energy around. From the formless liquid, he created a wafer-thin thread which most humans wouldn't even see except someone with his exceptional eyesight. The more soul energy Jason took out, the smaller the size of the liquid around the soul world core became. After his whole soul energy was taken from the liquid that enveloped his soul world core, Jason saw a golden-colored marble with an indescribable size as it was almost not visible, even for him. This almost invisible marble was his real soul world core, and it was almost embarrassing, only to look at. This golden marble had mysterious inscriptions on it, and it was his core, while the liquid mass floating around it was unstable soul energy ejected by the core was produced by his first soul bond. The first step of the Heaven's Hell technique was to draw out the unstable energy around the real soul world core with his mind to form a thread with the energy. This step wasn't dangerous, instead, one needed to have a sensible and accurate control over soul energy. His soul energy thread was less than half a meter long and wafer thin due to the very good innate control he had over mana. The first step was done in a relatively short time once Jason got the hang of how to handle soul energy. After that, one could see Jason sweating buckets inside his tent while gasping for air. He only sat down, and nobody could imagine that he entered his soul world except the small golden hue shining around his head as an indicator. Inside his soul world, Jason made himself ready for the painful part as the unstable soul energy was now formed into a complete thread. He would have to pierce through the golden marble with his thread to inject the soul energy inside it to force a certain growth. Without a slight push, Jason's soul energy wouldn't increase, and it was necessary for him to force himself through in order to do that. He had to aim at a certain spot to maximize the effect of the technique, and it took him quite a long time to find the right spot as it was already difficult for him to even see the soul world core. Piercing into the marble with the thread, searing pain spread through his whole body as it felt like hellfire ignited inside him. It spread from his brain, which felt as if it was roasted, to his heart, where it dispersed into the veins, only for Jason to feel a searing pain all over his body. While he cried out in pain inside the soul world, one could see the liquid thread invading the golden marble, blending into it after a certain amount of time. Jason had never felt such pain before, and he continued to cry out loud, but he couldn't leave the soul world as it could harm or even destroy his soul if he made a single fault. Until the whole wafer-thin thread completely blended into the golden marble, Jason had to endure the torture. An hour later the whole process was over, and Jason left the soul world with the floating golden marble in the center, only to fall into a deep slumber caused by his exhaustion. Waking up by suffocation early in the morning was as unpleasant as before, and Jason pushed the furball, also called Artemis, away gently. Opening his eyes, he could see Artemis, who looked at him as if he had betrayed her, and Jason felt her range of emotions that were filled with sadness. Taking her into his embrace, her mood changed quickly. Looking at her plumage with his mana eyes special ability activated, he saw that she had slightly more mana in her blood than a day before. If this continued, Artemis' ability could reach the strength of a 2-star wild beast while being a 1-star wild beast in the future. Continuing this mind game, Jason was expectant about her future growth and her evolution. Entering his soul world to look at the golden soul world core, Jason noticed something unexpected. Injecting the unstable foreign soul energy into his soul world core should only be done once a day, because the replenishing effect would take a long time for the soul world core to push out the unstable energy. However, looking at the still unstable, formless liquid surrounding the marginal small golden marble, Jason noticed that his whole soul energy was already replenished and expelled. A soul world core was like a generator and dialysis at the same time, producing a fixed amount of soul energy until its energy was used up. Refilling it with the expelled soul energy would activate the generator, cause it to once again expel the injected soul energy after cleansing and purifying it in order to make it more stable. Once the soul energy reached a certain size, purity, and degree of stability, the real process of the Heaven's Hell technique would begin with the following levels. Jason wasn't even remotely close to meet a single requirement that was previously named, but he was still astonished to see that his soul energy was replenished this fast. With this, he could already practice the Heaven's Hell technique again. Normally it would take a whole day to have one's soul energy replenished, but Jason slept for less than 6 hours and his soul energy was already completely replenished. Thus, Jason sat down and repeated the same procedure as the day before. It took him 90 minutes, and instead of less pain, this time it was even more painful, but he didn't faint. Enduring the pain quietly, Jason finished his practice, before he stood up. Washing up, he washed out of the tent into the open plains where he could see hundreds of youths gathering next to some strong-looking middle-aged men and women. Chapter 30 and 8 Battle Prodigies by Hydesgrain. The youths Jason could see in front of the dome looked like they were around 12 years old, but the weapons and armor they wore indicated a certain degree of wealth compared to Jason. He was poorer than he had ever been before, but he didn't mind that at all, as he had a unique soul, special mana eyes, and a beautiful soul bond. Venturing outside the dome into the one-star wild zone, Jason with Artemis circling above him, he instantly met a group of 4 2-star scaled wolves that attacked Jason and Artemis. This was bad, as one of the scales wolves looked bigger than the others. Upon activating his mana eyes, he saw that its core almost reached the 3-star wild beast rank, and the mana it possessed was also slightly larger than the other 3 scaled wolves. His mana eyes detected some anomalies within the large wolf, and Jason concluded that it might be a mutation or something like that, but he wasn't sure. Jason was slightly worried, but with Artemis as his support, he went into his fighting stance to welcome his enemies. Since Artemis grows stronger each day, Jason's physique, mana core, and even his eyesight improved along with her, and in this battle, his exceptional eyesight played a big role. The group of scaled wolves formed a half-circle and tried to surround him, while Artemis attacked the scaled wolves from behind to distract him. Once a wolf entered a certain range around him, Jason attacked it, forming it to step back, while Artemis used this chance to dive down on the retreating wolf to pierce her mana-infused claws into the scaled wolf's back. Without infusing mana into her claws, she wouldn't be able to pierce through the thick scales, but with the mana enhancement, she easily pierced into its back, injuring it lightly. Crying out in pain, the wolf twisted its head to find the culprit, but this was a mistake as it was still close to Jason's range. Jason infused mana into his lower body to increase his speed while pushing himself off to the injured scaled wolf. The 3 other wolves didn't mingle around and pounced at Jason, but it was already too late, as their comrade died with a dagger in its throat, because Jason used the perfect timing as he noticed it was the right moment to attack. This was because his eyes could tell with minuscule details that the scaled wolf would turn around to Artemis, and Jason used this to finish it off. After killing the scaled wolf, Jason used its body as a meat shield because the stronger scaled wolf was already behind him in the air, which Jason predicted. The scaled wolf corpse was heavy, but using a quarter of his mana was enough to enhance himself to throw the dead body at the pouncing wolf. Artemis was already in the air waiting for her next victim to fall into her trap as she supervised the battle while Jason attacked the bigger scaled wolf, which was taken by surprise. Jason couldn't attack its body directly as the dead wolf's corpse was in his way, but he pierced out with his dagger to cut through its paw. Yelping out in pain, the bigger scaled wolf was shocked for a second as something white dived down onto its head, piercing into the eyes. Jason and Artemis's teamwork was exceptional, and not many were able to build up such teamwork within the short amount of time they were together. One could say both were innately exceptionally connected, and it was rare to see such observance and tacit agreement among each other in a battle 4 against 2 while being weaker strength-wise. There were still 2 uninjured scaled wolves charging at Jason, and both were only around 3 meters apart from him when they tried to surround him from 2 sides. Thinking that the normal tactic would work against Jason, they missed an important fact. He wasn't alone. While both pounced at him at the same time, Artemis cried out, pointing out that the wolf behind Jason was also pouncing at him at the same time. Jason now knew that both were pouncing at him at the same time. Thus, he ducked down and used another quarter of his mana to increase his speed to the highest he could hold out to jump straight to the front where the blind and injured wolf was still howling in pain, pitying itself without caring about the calamity it would face a second later. While the two uninjured wolves crashed into each other, Jason finished off the larger-scaled wolf with a clean strike. Over the last few days, Jason discovered his fighting talent, which came probably thanks to his good eyesight, while the ability to see the mana flow was relatively good, even if he didn't have anyone to compare his combat prowess to. It was also way easier for him to detect where a beast would attack him and what its next move would be thanks to small but important details. The two remaining scaled wolves shook their heads in pain. Afterward, they looked at Jason furious, and seeing the dead leader they lost all remaining reasoning. Both charged straight at him, and this was the most threatening thing that could happen to Jason, as he wasn't able to defend against two beasts at the same time with a single dagger. Fortunately, Artemis was back into the air, diving down on one of the scaled wolves which saw the threat coming at it. Jason saw this, forcing the attacked scaled wolf to a difficult decision as he used his last remaining mana to charge at it. Now attacked by two threats at the same time, it was overwhelmed and halted its charge, betraying the last comrade it had because it wasn't sure what to do. Unfortunately, the scaled wolf's instincts told it that it should run away, instead of charging at the duo in front of it. The betrayed scaled wolf didn't know what happened, but he saw the youth charging at its friend as it tried to help. However, it could only see the youth changing its course with a big stride towards the side. Artemis also stopped her attack after she saw the wolf halting its charge while Jason changed his course, turning his dagger downwards in order to stab into the wolf's side, twisting it while continuing his run. The wolf didn't expect Jason's speed to increase so much more, and it was unaware of its injury as the legs gave in while liquid ran down its whole sight. Its eyes became heavier with each moment passing, and after enduring some pain it gave into the slumber that awaited the wolf. Jason was exhausted as he hadn't thought that he had to use all his mana in such a short time, but his speed did not decrease as the halted wolf saw its last comrade die because of its fault. Enraged, the scaled wolf attacked Jason only to end in the same situation as before. Artemis attacked the scaled wolf from above while Jason charged at it from the front. Thinking that Jason was the bigger threat, it charged at Jason, who rolled to the side while the enhanced talons of Artemis caused red stripes along the back of the wolf. Blood spurted out of the injury, and it wouldn't take long until it would lose enough blood to sustain a heavy injury. The scaled wolf was overwhelmed and didn't exactly know what it should do once again. Being in a desperate situation gives most living beings a boost in strength, and the wolf's speed increased slightly as it turned around to pounce at Jason, who was still on the bottom about to get up. Artemis was still flying up while the wolf's speed accelerated to its highest possible as it saw a green light shimmer leaving Jason's hand. There was nothing it could do as the jade iron dagger pierced in the wolf's skull, killing the scaled wolf instantly. Jason wasn't really good with dagger throwing, but one couldn't say it was difficult to aim at a large beast, 5 meters apart from one, with a certain degree of calmness. And even if he hadn't hit the skull, at least its chest would be pierced, slowing it down, which would give him enough time to stand up. Taking a deep breath, Jason felt exhausted as he pulled out the dagger before pulling out the pebble-sized cores. Storing the beast carcasses away, Jason went inside the dome that was only around 200 meters away from him. Each time Jason replenished his mana, took less and less time as he was becoming more and more proficiency with the process, which was entirely different compared to him gathering mana inside his eyes. An hour later his mana was completely refreshed while his exhaustion was blown away. Wondering about his soul world core, he entered the soul world to see that the core already expelled some unstable soul energy. Jason was now convinced that his soul was the best thing that could ever happen to him after getting back his eyesight. He calculated that 6 hours were more than enough for the soul energy to get completely expelled, and he renewed his schedule slightly. Chapter 31, Ready to Rumble by Hydesgrain. Almost 2 weeks passed and only 2 days were left from his initial 3 weeks in order to kill 5 5-star wild beasts or 1 awakened beast. Nothing special occurred during the last 2 weeks, but most importantly was that Jason and Artemis' strength increased quite a lot. Unexpectedly, Artemis broke her limit and entered the rank of a 2-star wild beast, which shocked Jason extremely. The mana she digested every day increased her physique, blood, and mana core. It was only a question of time until this would happen. He asked himself if Artemis could even evolve, as she could even break her limit because of her mutation. Or was that something every beast could do with enough mana? But then, why would his eyes tell him something about the potential of beasts? Was Artemis able to break through her shackles because of her superior digestion ability or because of the high amount of mana? Jason didn't know, and he couldn't find an answer because he was also unable to tell what exactly Artemis' potential was. The mutation Jason thought of was a complex one that involved some sort of gluttony and a stomach that could digest huge amounts of mana. But how could Jason be sure of that, as he had never heard of such a mutation? Furthermore, he wasn't even sure if Artemis could eat something else. She has yet to eat something else other than the cores of wild beasts and mana stones. Her plumage shimmered more with each day passing, and the amount of mana within her blood increased steadily. Artemis grew slightly in size with a wingspan of more than a meter, while her length was around 35 centimeters, but most importantly was that even her talons were strengthened. She should be able to pierce through the scales of the scaled wolf without enhancing them with mana. Jason, however, was still at the 3rd novice rank, while his mastery over the modified Azure Feisty Ape technique reached the familiar mastery. His combat prowess soared, and he learned how to use his mana more efficiently. He was even able to eradicate a small group of 3-star wild beasts and lone 4-star wild beasts with the help of Artemis. But that wasn't everything, as Jason used the Heaven's Hell technique 3 times a day instead of 1 time a day, which was pretty nice to increase his soul energy, purify and stabilize it. Due to the natural breakthrough of Artemis, Jason got more shared soul energy, mana, and his physique increased. Jason was happy that Artemis grew stronger, and his mana core reached the size of a normal 5th novice rank, while his physique reached the 4th novice rank standard. However, the soul energy he needed to keep Artemis by his side, or rather inside his soul world, increased from the initial 1 unit to 2. Because of Jason's fast soul energy replenishing and his utilization of the Heaven's Hell technique 3 times a day, which was painful like nothing else he had ever felt, his soul energy reached almost the required amount of 2. It was still enough to take a hold of Artemis, but once she reached the 3-star wild beast rank, Jason would be in trouble, as the soul energy requirement would be around 4. But there wasn't anything he could do about it. He should work hard and use the Heaven's Hell technique as often as possible. With his increased soul energy, or rather double amount from 1 to 2, each practice would increase his soul energy double the amount than 2 weeks before. And this would only continue on his path. As long as his soul energy reached 4, the Heaven's Hell technique's efficiency would result in a doubled increase compared to the time he only had a soul energy of 2, and 4 times increase to the initial soul energy of 1, as everything worked exponentially. Jason discovered something, and he would love to try the theory he began to develop, but for him to try this he would need quite a bit of soul energy. Today he would hunt pairs of 4-star wild beasts, and if he could kill 2 or 3 of them without sustaining an injury, he would try assassinating 5-star wild beasts. It was dangerous, but what could he do? With enough safety measures and tactics that involved Artemis, he was confident in not dying against 4-star wild beasts. There was no way for him to hunt an awakened beast, as there was a huge difference in combat strength between wild beasts and awakened beasts. Once a beast reaches the awakened rank, the possibility to awaken an ability appears. While some beasts don't have a single ability, their physical traits increase a lot once they reach the awakened rank. If he was completely honest, Jason was extremely horrified to fight 5-star wild beasts while being at the lower levels of the novice rank. In the end, he had to face beasts that had at least double his strength and mana. Jason was confident in his control over mana, martial art proficiency, intelligence, and ability to marginally foretell where he was about to get attacked. Throughout the morning, he looked for a spot with a few trees and bushes around in order to hide and surprise attack some small 4-star beast groups. Suddenly he spotted an almost completely green bison walking around with its head held high. No beast dared to come too close to it, as it grazed without caring about anything at all. Looking at the beast's mana core, Jason found out something interesting. The aura around the beast was black, which indicated its chances to reach the awakened rank, but scanning the mana core, it looked like it was a black horned bison with an elemental mutation, as the mana had green-colored traced within. It was extremely rare to see a wild beast having an elemental ability, and the problem with wild beasts having an affinity was simply huge amounts of mana had to be used in order to completely integrate the affinity to a wild stage beast's body. This caused the physique of these wild beasts to be weaker than their peers. Looking at the highly likely wind elemental mutated black horned bison in front of him, Jason estimated that its physical strength should be around a normal 3-star wild beast. Nevertheless, having an elemental affinity caused it to be the strongest in its surrounding. If a normal 5-star wild beast were to attack this bison, Jason didn't even have to consider who the winner might be, as the bison would probably use its element to shoot shards or blades out, easily killing the normal 5-star wild beast. Having a weaker physique wouldn't matter in this case, as it was unnecessary to even use the physique to defeat its enemies. And with such a mutation, once the bison reached higher ranks, the wind affinity would only become stronger, while the disadvantage of having a weaker physique would diminishing slowly. Thinking for a while, Jason decided that attacking the mutated bison might be the easiest way to kill a 5-star wild beast, as its guard was down due to its high confidence. Jason sent out Artemis to look after the mutated bison while he thought about multiple ways to come close to the bison, without drawing too much attention on himself. He thought of one solution, however, he didn't like this idea because he had to use Artemis as bait. Calculating a few things, he asked Artemis for her opinion, after which she replied confidently. Still worried, Artemis reassured him that she would be careful, so he couldn't do anything about that anymore.